Travis Bennett's coffee mug trembled as Carolyn Holloway, the billionaire CEO whose pipes he'd fixed 12 hours ago, stood at his apartment door with a designer suitcase, her voice cracking. "I hope there's room." Behind him, 7-year-old Owen peeked out in dinosaur pajamas, watching the woman in a $1,000 coat standing in their hallway that reeked of mold and broken dreams. Just last night, exhausted and covered in pipe grease, Travis had joked to this stranger crying in her empty penthouse, "If you're tired of all this space, move in with me." He'd meant nothing by it, a throwaway line from a single dad who made bad jokes to fill silence. But here she was, mascara still smudged, clutching that suitcase like a lifeline. The neighbors' doors were already cracking open, whispers starting. What happens when a joke becomes someone's last hope? And what did she mean when she whispered, "You don't know what you've just saved me from"? The Friday night before had started like every other Friday in Travis Bennett's life, a carefully choreographed dance of survival that he'd perfected over 3 years. At 38, he lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in South End, the kind of building where the elevator worked 3 days out of 7. The heating clanged like a ghost in chains, and the hallway perpetually smelled of Mrs. Rodriguez's cabbage soup, mixed with something that might have been mold or might have been hope dying slowly. He juggled 3 jobs with the precision of a circus performer who couldn't afford to drop a single ball. Plumbing during weekdays, bartending at Murphy's Tavern on Friday nights, and cleaning offices in the financial district every Sunday morning before Owen woke up. Owen was 7 now, in 2nd grade at Jefferson Elementary, smart enough to skip a grade, but Travis couldn't afford the advanced program fees. The boy had his mother's delicate features and his father's stubborn optimism, though lately he'd been asking questions that carved pieces from Travis's heart. "Dad, why don't we have a house like Charlie Morrison's?" he'd asked 2 nights ago, his brown eyes wide with the innocent curiosity that hadn't yet learned some questions hurt to answer. Charlie lived 3 blocks over in a townhouse with a backyard, a swing set, and parents who didn't have to choose between groceries and field trip fees. Travis had been on the living room floor, carefully applying duct tape to Owen's sneakers for the 3rd time that month, the soul gaping open like a mouth trying to speak uncomfortable truths about their situation. "Because," Travis had said with his practiced grin, the one that fooled everyone but himself, "shoes with special dad repairs run faster than 3 pairs of new ones. It's pure science, buddy. The duct tape makes them aerodynamic, like race cars." Owen had laughed, that pure crystalline sound that made every sacrifice worthwhile, and Travis had ruffled his sandy hair, pushing down the familiar ache that came with lying to protect innocence. But later that night, after Owen fell asleep clutching Mr. Peanuts, the stuffed elephant that was Catherine's last gift, Travis sat at their scratched kitchen table, staring at bills spread like tarot cards predicting disaster. Electric bill, 60 days past due. Final notice printed in aggressive red. Rent, due in 5 days. $1,200 he didn't have. 3 text messages from Mrs. Parker, their landlord, each progressively less patient, the last one containing the word eviction, like a loaded gun. The bartending shift would bring maybe $150 in tips if he was lucky, but it wouldn't be enough. It was never enough. The refrigerator hummed its death rattle, the compressor struggling like Travis himself, working too hard for too long. On the counter, Owen's permission slip for the Science Museum field trip lay unsigned, $20 that might as well have been $20,000. Travis didn't cry anymore. He'd used up that luxury 3 years ago when Catherine's heart monitor flatlined after the drunk driver's impact. Instead, he sat in the darkness, the only light coming from the street lamp outside, filtering through windows he couldn't afford to replace, and whispered his nightly prayer to a universe that seemed to have gone deaf. Just 1 more month. Give me 1 more month to figure this out. He thought about Catherine then, how she'd always found solutions where he saw only walls, how she'd say, "We're a team, Trav," usually while they tackled something impossible, like assembling Owen's crib with missing instructions or stretching $20 into a week of meals. But teams needed all their players, and he'd been playing alone for 1,095 days, not that he was counting. Friday night at Murphy's Tavern was controlled chaos, the kind Travis had learned to navigate with his eyes closed. He'd dropped Owen at Mrs. People in Henderson's apartment 2 doors down. She watched him for free because that's what neighbors do for each other. Though Travis fixed her leaky faucets and carried her groceries up 2 flights of stairs whenever he could, payment in kind for kindness. The bar was packed with financial district workers celebrating their survival of another corporate week, their $100 ties loosened, their laughter pitched too high with alcohol and false freedom. Travis moved efficiently behind the bar, muscle memory guiding his hands, while his mind ran calculations. If he picked up 2 extra cleaning shifts, if the Johnson plumbing job came through, if the universe would finally cut him just 1 break. At 9:17 p.m., he remembered the exact time because the ancient Budweiser clock above the bar had just flickered. His phone buzzed. Normally he'd ignore it during a shift, but the caller ID showed DeMarco's emergency plumbing, and Sal DeMarco only called when he had overflow work that paid cash. "Travis, got an emergency. Burst pipe in a penthouse at Holloway Tower. 300 cash if you can handle it now." Travis didn't hesitate, gesturing to Murphy, who nodded understanding. Everyone knew Travis's situation, though they pretended not to out of respect. $300 meant electricity wouldn't be cut off, meant Owen could go on that field trip, meant breathing room for exactly 1 more week. Holloway Tower rose 28 floors into the night sky, all gleaming glass and steel that reflected the city lights like a giant middle finger to poverty. Travis parked his van, Bennett Plumbing, barely visible through peeling paint, between a Mercedes S-Class and a Tesla that cost more than he'd make in 5 years. The security guard, a heavy-set man whose name tag read Eugene, looked at Travis's worn work clothes with the familiar mixture of disdain and pity that service workers knew too well. "Penthouse," Eugene said, after checking the work order, his tone suggesting Travis better not steal anything. "Private elevator. Don't drip on anything expensive." Travis wanted to say everything in this building was expensive, but he just nodded, shouldering his tool bag. The elevator was larger than Owen's bedroom, with mirrors on 3 sides that multiplied his exhaustion into infinity. 28 floors up felt like ascending to another planet. One where people worried about stock portfolios instead of past due notices. When the doors opened directly into the penthouse, Travis had to consciously keep his mouth closed. The space was massive, probably 3,000 square feet of marble and chrome and glass, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view that made the city look like jewelry scattered on black velvet. Everything was white. White leather, white walls, white marble, like someone had been afraid of color contaminating their life. Standing at those windows, her back to him, was a woman in a gray Armani suit, her dark hair in a bun that was slowly unraveling like her composure. "The pipe's in the corner," she said without turning, her voice hoarse with what sounded like hours of crying. "I won't be in your way." Travis found the problem quickly. A compression fitting had failed behind a credenza that probably cost more than his annual rent. Water had pooled on marble floors that had never known a spill before this moment. He worked in silence for 30 minutes, the only sounds his tools clinking and the woman's occasional shuddering breath from across the room. When he finished, Travis stood, wiping his hands on his work cloth, and really looked at the space. It was magnificent and terrible, like a museum after closing, beautiful but devoid of life. No photographs, no books with cracked spines, no coffee rings on tables, no evidence that humans actually lived here. "Nice place," he said, because the silence was becoming oppressive. But it looks lonely. The woman, Carolyn Holloway, he'd later learn, turned to face him for the first time. Carolyn's mascara had run in black rivers down her cheeks, her carefully constructed corporate armor cracked and leaking. "You're right," she said simply. "It's the loneliest place on earth. My husband left last week, said I'd married my company instead of him. 15 years of marriage reduced to a forwarding address and a lawyer's business card." Something in her voice, the way it broke on 15 years, made Travis sit on the spotless white sofa, ignoring how out of place his work clothes looked against the pristine leather. They talked until nearly midnight, about loss, his wife, her marriage, about children, his Owen, the kids she never had time for, about the different ways life could empty you out. "I've built an empire," Carolyn said, staring at her hands. "Sold thousands of homes to thousands of families. I know the square footage of happiness, apparently. It's 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, and a finished basement. But I go home to 3,000 square feet of nothing." Travis told her about Catherine, about the drunk driver who'd stolen their future in 7 seconds of twisted metal, about raising Owen alone while juggling jobs like a desperate circus act. "But you smile," she observed, and he'd replied, "If I don't smile, how will Owen know the world's still worth waking up for?" When Travis stood to leave, the repair finished, he'd looked back at this broken billionaire in her empty palace and made the joke that would change everything. "If you ever get tired of all this space, you could move in with me. My apartment's cramped, falling apart, and smells like whatever Mrs. Rodriguez is cooking. But at least there's laughter." Carolyn had smiled then, the first real expression he'd seen from her. "I'll remember that," she'd said, and Travis had laughed, waved goodbye, and left, thinking it was just one of those strange midnight conversations that feel profound, but evaporate with dawn. Saturday morning arrived with Carolyn at his door, designer suitcase in hand, her "I hope there's room" hanging in the air like a question the universe was asking. Owen had peeked out, dinosaur pajamas and bed hair, immediately enchanted by the pretty lady. Mrs. Henderson's door had cracked open, her eyes wide with gossip-gathering efficiency. Travis had stood frozen, coffee cooling in his hand, trying to process the impossibility of Carolyn Holloway standing in his moldy hallway. When he finally invited her in, she'd looked around his apartment, water stains, mismatched furniture, toys scattered like colorful landmines, and said, "This feels like home." The negotiation was swift and surreal. Carolyn needed space to think, to remember who I was before I became what I own. She'd pay rent, insisting on 3 months up front, $3,000 that made Travis's hands shake as he held the check. Owen could have the bedroom he shared with Travis. Travis would take the couch. Carolyn would take the second bedroom they'd used for storage. Catherine's things finally sorted with gentle hands. "This is insane," Travis had said. "When has sanity ever led to happiness?" she'd countered. Owen had settled it with 7-year-old wisdom. "She can stay, Dad. She looks like she needs pancakes." That first week was a careful dance of boundaries and discoveries. Carolyn couldn't operate the coin-operated washing machine in the basement. Travis taught her about quarters and fabric softener. She burned spaghetti, somehow, filling the apartment with smoke. Owen showed her how to make mac and cheese from a box, declaring her not hopeless, just learning. She sat on the floor helping Owen with his Legos, her $1,000 outfit getting covered in carpet fuzz, looking happier than she had in years. Travis watched from the kitchen, wondering what parallel universe he'd stumbled into, where billionaire CEOs sat cross-legged on his worn carpet, laughing at his son's jokes about dinosaurs wearing ties to work. The second week brought routine and unexpected rhythms. Carolyn woke at 5 a.m., corporate habits dying hard, and made coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Travis taught her about public transportation because her driver had been reassigned, watching her navigate the subway with the determination of someone learning a new language. She picked Owen up from school when Travis had emergency plumbing calls, standing among the other parents in her designer clothes like a flamingo among pigeons. But Owen didn't care. He just knew someone was there for him. Neighbors began to whisper, then talk, then openly stare. "Is that your girlfriend?" Mrs. Henderson asked Travis directly, handing him mail she'd accidentally collected. Mr. Kowalski from 3B muttered about rich people slumming it, loud enough to be heard. But Owen was blooming under the attention. Someone to help with homework when Travis worked late. Someone who listened to his stories about school with genuine interest. Someone who didn't look exhausted all the time. Carolyn learned to cook 5 different meals, all Owen's favorites, following YouTube tutorials with the intensity she'd once reserved for quarterly reports. Thursday night of that second week, Travis came home from a particularly brutal job, sewage backup at a restaurant, to find Carolyn and Owen building a fort out of couch cushions and sheets. They'd ordered pizza and were eating it inside the fort, Owen explaining the complex political structure of his second-grade class. Carolyn looked up at Travis, her hair messy, her face free of makeup, and mouthed, "Thank you." He joined them in the fort, and for 1 perfect hour, they were just 3 people sharing pizza and laughter. The outside world and its impossibilities kept at bay by bed sheets and imagination. But Friday brought reality crashing back. Carolyn's phone rang constantly. Board members, lawyers, reporters who'd gotten wind of something. She took calls in the bedroom, emerging with red eyes and clenched fists. "They want me to choose," she told Travis late that night after Owen was asleep. "The board says I'm damaging the company's reputation. Living like this. With you. With..." She gestured around the apartment. "They don't understand. I've never felt more like myself than I have in these 2 weeks. Is that crazy?" Travis wanted to say yes, wanted to protect himself and Owen from the inevitable moment when she'd leave. But instead, he said, "The only crazy thing is how long it took you to find yourself." The 3rd week exploded like a pipe under pressure. A photographer caught Carolyn grocery shopping with Travis and Owen. She was pushing the cart while Owen rode inside, laughing. Travis beside them comparing cereal prices. The photo went viral. Billionaire CEO slums it with blue-collar boy toy. The headlines were cruel, the implications worse. Carolyn's phone became a weapon of mass destruction, firing off bad news with every ring. Board meeting emergency scheduled, stock prices dropping, competitors circling like sharks, smelling blood in the water. Monday morning, Carolyn left for the office in her full armor. Power suit, war paint makeup, heels that could kill. And came back that night diminished, smaller somehow. "They gave me an ultimatum," she said, not looking at Travis or Owen, who was pretending to do homework while obviously listening. "Leave this apartment. Leave you both. Or lose my position. 48 hours to decide." Owen's pencil stopped moving. Travis felt his heart stop too, because he'd known this was coming, had been waiting for the other shoe to drop since the moment she'd appeared at his door. That night, Owen drew a picture. 3 stick figures holding hands in front of a house, sun shining, flowers growing. He left it on the kitchen table with a note in his careful second-grade handwriting. "For Carlin, so you remember us." The misspelling made it perfect, made it hurt more. Travis found Carolyn crying over it at 3 a.m., silent tears that shook her whole body. "I can't lose this," she whispered. "I can't lose you both. But I built that company for 20 years. It's all I was before this." Travis held her, the first time they'd touched beyond accidental brushes, and said, "You're more than what you built. You're who you choose to be." Wednesday arrived like a death sentence. Reporters had found the building, camping outside like vultures waiting for carrion. Someone spray-painted "Gold Digger" on Travis's van. Owen came home from school quiet. Too quiet. And finally admitted kids were saying mean things about his dad, about Carolyn, about their weird fake family. Travis felt rage like he hadn't since Catherine's death. Not the sad, tired anger of poverty, but the burning fury of someone watching his child suffer for adult choices. He wanted to tell Carolyn to leave, to choose her company, to stop the bleeding before it got worse. But Owen beat him to it, looking at Carolyn over dinner with those two wise eyes. "If you need to go, it's okay. But we'll miss you forever." The fourth week began with Carolyn packing. She moved slowly, folding clothes that cost more than Travis made in a month, placing them in the suitcase that had brought her here. Owen watched from the doorway, Mr. Peanuts clutched to his chest, not crying but something worse, accepting, like he'd learned too young that good things always left. Travis went through the motions of normal life, but everything felt hollow, like they were actors in a play about a family rather than being one. Tuesday night, the board sent their final ultimatum via email. Travis saw it when Carolyn left her laptop open, the subject line screaming, "Final notice, 24 hours to comply." The message was clinical, corporate, talking about reputation management and stock value and fiduciary responsibility. All words that meant nothing in the face of Owen asking why Carolyn looked so sad all the time now. That night, none of them slept. They sat in the living room, Owen curled between the two adults, watching a movie about finding family in unexpected places, pretending they weren't memorizing each other's faces. Wednesday morning, Travis made a decision. He put on his least worn shirt, the one he saved for court dates and funerals, and told Carolyn he was coming with her to the board meeting. "You don't have to," she started, but he cut her off. "Yes, I do. Because if you're going to fight for us, you shouldn't fight alone." Owen insisted on coming too, wearing his school uniform because it's my fancy clothes. They looked ridiculous. A plumber, a second grader, and a CEO, walking into Holloway Tower like they belonged there. Eugene, the security guard, did a double take, but said nothing, perhaps recognizing something in their faces that transcended economics. The boardroom occupied the entire 25th floor, with a table long enough to land aircraft and windows that turned the city into a game board where real people were just pieces to be moved. 12 board members sat like a tribunal, their faces ranging from curious to hostile to coldly indifferent. At the head sat Reginald Foster, 65 years old with silver hair and eyes like winter, the kind of man who measured human worth in quarterly earnings. Travis and Owen waited in the hallway, Owen swinging his legs from a chair too tall for him, Travis trying not to feel like he was sending Carolyn into a lion's den alone. Inside, Carolyn stood at the head of the table, refusing to sit, refusing to be diminished. Foster opened with practiced corporate brutality. "Ms. Holloway, your recent behavior has compromised this company's reputation. We've lost 3 major clients. Stock is down 12%. The media is having a field day with your situation." He said situation like it was something scraped off his shoe. "We built this empire together, Carolyn. Don't destroy it for some working-class fantasy." "Fantasy?" Carolyn's voice was steady, but Travis, listening through the door Owen had cracked open, could hear the steel beneath. "Let me tell you about fantasy, Reginald. Fantasy is sitting in this room discussing theoretical families, while never going home to your actual one. Fantasy is building thousands of homes while living in empty spaces. Fantasy is believing that reputation matters more than reality." She paused, looking at each board member. "I met Travis Bennett when he fixed a pipe in my penthouse. Do you know what he said? He said my 3,000 square foot apartment looked lonely. He was right. It was the loneliest place on earth. This is not about your personal, Foster started, but Carolyn raised her hand. Everything is personal, Reginald. Every house we sell, every family we serve, it's all personal. Our company slogan is, building homes, creating families. But I'd forgotten what those words meant until a 7-year-old boy taught me to make mac and cheese from a box and thought it was the greatest achievement in the world when I didn't burn it. Until a man who works 3 jobs and duct tapes his son's shoes showed me that wealth isn't about what you have, but who you share it with. Her voice cracked slightly. I've spent 3 weeks in a 2-bedroom apartment with water stains and temperamental heating, and I've been happier than I was in 15 years of marriage in a penthouse. Harold Preston, 80 years old, and one of the original founders, cleared his throat. I started this company 45 years ago because I wanted my son to have a good home. He has a mansion in Connecticut now. Haven't seen him in 2 years. His children, my grandchildren, don't know my name. I gave him everything money could buy and nothing that mattered. He looked at Carolyn with eyes that had seen too much success and not enough life. Maybe you're reminding us what we forgot. Patricia Nguyen, the youngest board member at 35, spoke up. My daughter asked me last week why I never eat dinner with them. I said I was building their future. She said she'd rather have the present. I didn't have an answer. She looked at Foster. Carolyn's personal life is her own. What matters is whether she can lead this company. She's embarrassing us, Foster insisted. Living in squalor, dating a plumber. The door burst open. Owen stood there, small and fierce, his dinosaur backpack making him look even younger. My dad's not embarrassing. His voice shook but carried. He fixes things nobody else can fix. He makes people's houses work. And he fixed Carolyn when she was broken. That's not embarrassing. That's superhero stuff. Travis tried to pull Owen back, mortified, but Carolyn held up her hand, tears streaming down her face. Out of the mouths of babes, she said softly, then louder, addressing the board. This child understands more about value than we do. We got so caught up in square footage that we forgot about heart space. We measured success in dollars instead of laughter. I'm not asking you to approve of my choices. I'm telling you that these choices have made me better at my job, because now I understand what home really means. Foster called for a vote. One by one, hands rose or stayed down. Preston voted first, for Carolyn. Nguyen followed, then others, slowly, like dominoes falling toward humanity. When the count finished, it was 10-1, with one abstention, Carolyn herself, who refused to vote for her own fate. Foster sat alone in his objection, looking suddenly old and tired. The board has spoken, he said formally. Miss Holloway retains her position. In the hallway, Carolyn collapsed to her knees, pulling Owen into a fierce hug. Thank you, she whispered to the boy. Thank you for saving me. Owen hugged back, confused, but pleased. That's what families do, he said simply, and Travis felt his heart break and remake itself in the span of those 4 words. They walked out of Holloway Tower together, the CEO, the plumber, and the boy, not caring who stared, who photographed, who judged. They'd won something more valuable than corporate approval. They'd won the right to choose their own definition of family. February arrived with snow and stability, the crisis 2 months behind them, but its lessons carved deep. The media had moved on to other scandals, though occasionally an article would surface. The CEO who chose love over luxury, or billionaire's bizarre living arrangement boosts company image. Carolyn had returned to work with renewed purpose, implementing policies that recognized employees as humans with families, not just resources with productivity metrics. The stock had not only recovered, but risen, investors apparently appreciating a CEO who understood what homes really meant. Travis had struggled with Carolyn's offer of investment in his own company. "I can't take your money," he'd argued over breakfast, Owen listening while pretending to read comics. "It would make everything we have feel like a transaction." They'd fought about it for a week, their first real conflict, with Owen eventually mediating. "Why don't you borrow it and pay it back? Then it's not a gift. It's just help." The 7-year-old's solution had made both adults laugh, then think. Carolyn had drawn up official loan papers, $20,000 at 3% interest, the lowest legal rate. "And in exchange," she'd added with a smile, "you teach me to actually live, to cook real food, fix things with my hands, understand what it means to build rather than buy." Bennett Plumbing Services had launched in March with Travis as owner and 2 employees, both single fathers from his support group, men who understood the juggle of pipes and parenthood. The first month had been rocky, but Carolyn's business acumen, offered gently over dinner conversations, had helped Travis understand pricing, marketing, and the mysterious world of small business taxes. He'd insisted on keeping prices affordable for South End residents, doing free work for elderly neighbors, maintaining the connection to his community even as his business grew. Carolyn had transformed too, but not in the way the board might have expected. She still ran Holloway Real Estate with precision and power, but she'd also instituted the Holloway Home Fund, a $1 million annual initiative providing housing assistance to single parents. The Affordable Housing Initiative had launched with fanfare, but the real change was in how she approached each day. She left the office by 6 p.m. most nights, home for dinner with Travis and Owen. She'd learned to cook 12 different meals, though her specialty remained the mac and cheese Owen had first taught her. She helped with homework, attended Owen's school plays, and once showed up to career day to talk about real estate, though Owen had introduced her as Carolyn, who lives with us and makes good pancakes now. The neighborhood had shifted from suspicion to acceptance, largely due to Mrs. Henderson's influence. After Carolyn had spent 3 hours helping the elderly woman sort through Medicare paperwork, using her business skills for bureaucratic navigation, Mrs. Henderson had declared to anyone who'd listened that girl's got a good heart under all that money. Mr. Kowalski had apologized for his earlier comments after Carolyn had arranged for his daughter to get an internship at Holloway Real Estate. The building, once divided by gossip, had unified around the strange family in 2B. But it wasn't all smooth. Travis still worked long hours establishing his business. Carolyn still faced corporate pressures that followed her home in the form of late-night calls and emergency emails. Owen had had a hard week when kids at school had found old internet articles about the scandal, coming home in tears asking if Carolyn was just using them for good publicity. That night, Carolyn had sat with Owen, showing him her phone, where she'd saved every picture they'd taken together. Owen with bedhead, the 3 of them covered in flour from a failed baking attempt. Travis asleep on the couch with Owen and Carolyn reading on either side. "You don't save pictures of people you're using," she'd said. "You save pictures of people you love." 14 months after Carolyn Holloway had stood at Travis Bennett's door with a suitcase and an impossible request, they sat around a new dinner table, solid oak, big enough for 3, bought with Travis's first business profit that he'd insisted on spending on something permanent. October had come round again, the same crisp air that had witnessed their beginning, but everything else had transformed in ways both subtle and profound. Bennett and Sons Plumbing, Owen had insisted on the name, declaring himself future CEO, had 5 employees, 3 vans with freshly painted logos, and contracts with 2 major building complexes. Travis had paid back Carolyn's loan 6 months early, the check presented with a bouquet of flowers and a card that said, "Thanks for believing in someone who'd stopped believing in himself." The business was thriving not because of Carolyn's connections. Travis had refused those, but because word had spread about the plumber who did quality work at fair prices and understood that a broken pipe at 2 a.m. was a crisis for a family. not just a lucrative emergency call. Owen, now 9 and in 4th grade, had grown in ways that made Travis's chest tight with pride and something like awe. He was still the sweet, curious boy who'd offered Carolyn pancakes that first morning, but he'd gained a confidence that came from security, from knowing that his small family, unconventional as it was, wouldn't disappear. He'd become captain of his school's coding club, a program Carolyn had quietly funded, but let Owen discover on his own merit. The boy wore his Bennett and Sons t-shirt every weekend, telling anyone who'd listen about his dad's company and Aunt Carolyn's empire, as he'd taken to calling Holloway real estate. Carolyn remained CEO, but she was a different leader now. The woman who'd once measured success in square footage and profit margins had implemented revolutionary policies: subsidized childcare for all employees, flexible work-from-home options for parents, and a program where company executives spent 1 day monthly doing frontline work, answering phones, showing houses, understanding what their employees actually faced. The board, even Foster, had admitted the changes had not only improved morale, but had increased productivity and profits. Happy employees build better homes for happy families, Carolyn had said at the last shareholders' meeting. And the applause had been genuine. They still lived in the same 2-bedroom apartment in South End, though they could have afforded to move. They'd discussed it once, looking at a nice 3-bedroom in a better school district, but Owen had vetoed it immediately. "This is our home," he'd said with 7-year-old certainty that had aged into 9-year-old wisdom. "This is where we became us." So they'd stayed, though they'd made improvements, fixed the leaky ceiling, replaced the temperamental refrigerator, painted the walls a warm yellow that Owen had chosen. The 2nd bedroom was fully Carolyn's now, Catherine's belongings carefully preserved, but relocated, making room for the present while honoring the past. That October evening, as they sat around their oak table, Owen looked between the 2 adults with the serious expression that preceded important announcements. "Miss Carter asked us to write about our families today," he said, referring to his 4th grade teacher. "She said I could write about any kind of family because families come in all shapes." He pulled out a creased paper from his backpack, clearing his throat dramatically. "I wrote, my family isn't normal. My mom died when I was 4, but she's still with us in pictures and in how Dad smiles when he tells stories about her. Carolyn isn't my mom, but she chose to stay when she could have left. She says we saved her, but I think we saved each other. Dad says family isn't about blood or papers, but about choosing to show up every day. We choose each other every morning. And that's better than normal. It's perfect." Carolyn's eyes filled with tears she'd learned not to hide. Travis reached across the table, taking both her hand and Owen's. Outside, South End continued its noisy existence. Sirens and music and voices in 3 languages arguing about parking spaces. Inside their apartment, in the warm circle of light from the second-hand chandelier Carolyn had found, and Travis had rewired, they sat in comfortable silence that said everything words couldn't capture. The penthouse Carolyn had abandoned had sold months ago to a family with 3 children who'd immediately filled it with noise and life. She'd smiled at the closing, knowing it had finally become what it was meant to be, a home, not just a space. "I have something to tell you both," Carolyn said suddenly, her voice carrying an unusual tremor. Travis and Owen looked at her expectantly. "The board wants to expand Holloway real estate nationally. They want me to move to New York to oversee it." Owen's face fell, his hand pulling away, but Carolyn quickly continued. "I told them no. I said my home is here, my family is here, and no amount of success is worth leaving that behind." Foster nearly had a stroke, but Preston backed me up. Said a CEO who knows what matters is worth more than one who just follows opportunity. Travis felt relief flood through him so intensely his hands shook. "You're staying?" "I'm staying," Carolyn confirmed. "Where else would I go? This is home. You 2 are home." Owen launched himself at Carolyn, hugging her fiercely. Good, he said, his voice muffled against her shoulder. Because I already told everyone at school you're coming to the winter play. You can't make me a liar. They laughed, the sound filling their small apartment, spilling out into the hallway, where Mrs. Henderson smiled knowingly, where life continued in its messy, imperfect, beautiful way. Travis looked at this scene, his son and the woman who'd walked into their lives with designer luggage and desperation, who'd traded an empire's worth of space for 2 bedrooms of belonging, and thought about that night 14 months ago when he'd sat in darkness whispering for just 1 more month to figure things out. The universe, it turned out, hadn't given him more time. It had given him Carolyn, who'd shown him that sometimes the answer to problems isn't working harder or longer, but opening your door to impossible possibilities. That sometimes a joke about moving in could become the foundation for a family that no blueprint could have designed. That sometimes home isn't about the building at all, but about who's willing to stay, when staying is hard. Who's willing to choose love over logic? Who's willing to trade square footage for heart space? As they cleared the dinner table together, a routine now, each with their role, Owen drying, Carolyn washing, Travis putting away. Travis caught his reflection in the kitchen window. He looked older, certainly, but also somehow younger. The deep worry lines that had become permanent fixtures, softening into something like peace. Behind his reflection, he saw Carolyn and Owen, and for a moment, he could almost see Catherine too, smiling, approving, telling him what she'd always said. We're a team. They were. Not the team he'd planned, not the team anyone would have predicted, but the team they'd chosen, built from heartbreak and hope, from bad jokes that became good realities, from the courage to say, I hope there's room, and the wisdom to answer, there's always room for family. The dishes done, homework checked, they settled into their evening routine, Owen building with Legos while explaining his latest elaborate creation, Carolyn reviewing documents with reading glasses she'd finally admitted she needed, Travis sketching plans for a bathroom renovation he'd bid on. Normal things. Family things. The city hummed its nighttime symphony outside their windows, and inside, in their small apartment that had witnessed transformation beyond its water-stained walls' wildest dreams, they were home. They were whole. They were exactly where they belonged, not because life had put them there, but because they'd chosen it, chosen each other, chosen to believe that love could be built from the most unlikely blueprints. Later, after Owen was asleep, Travis and Carolyn stood at the window, looking out at South End's patchwork of lights and shadows. Do you ever regret it? Travis asked quietly. The penthouse, the prestige, the simplicity of your old life? Carolyn considered, then shook her head slowly. I regret that it took me 42 years to understand the difference between having a house and having a home. But regret the choice? Never. You and Owen gave me something I didn't even know I was looking for. You gave me a reason to come home at night that wasn't just about being too tired to stay at the office. She paused, then added with a small smile. Plus, I make excellent mac and cheese now. That's a life skill. Travis laughed softly, not wanting to wake Owen. You know, when you showed up that morning, I thought I was having a breakdown. CEOs don't just appear at broken-down apartments asking to move in. And plumbers don't usually save CEOs from themselves with bad jokes and good hearts, Carolyn countered. But here we are. Here they were. In a 2-bedroom apartment in South End, where the heating still clanged, where Mrs. Rodriguez's cabbage soup still permeated the hallways, where the elevator worked 4 days out of 7 now, an improvement, where life was measured not in square feet, but in moments of connection, in choosing each other again each morning, in the beautiful, imperfect, impossible arithmetic of love that said 2 bedrooms could hold infinite happiness if the right people were inside. "Here we are," Travis repeated, and in those 3 words lived everything: gratitude for the past that had shaped them, joy in the present they'd built, and faith in the future they'd choose together. One day, one laugh, one shared meal at a time. The city sparkled beyond their window, millions of lives in millions of homes. But theirs, small and worn and perfect, was the only one that mattered. They were home. They were family. They were proof that sometimes the best things in life come from the worst jokes, the most unlikely meetings, and the courage to say yes when everything logical says no.